Make sourdough with me using Ben Starr's method. He has multiple YouTube videos about how to make it using this method. You start with unfed starter, so mine does have this layer of liquid on the top. We've been on a trip, so this has been in the fridge probably a week and a half, and he says just stir it right back in. No need to pour it off. Again, for mine, it was just a little bit of liquid on the top, so I stirred it right back in. The other part to this is using starter that's at 100% hydration, meaning you feed it equal parts water and flour. So I have my bowl on a scale and I measured out 113 grams of the sourdough starter, and then I added 340 grams of water. He says, and everyone says, filtered water. I just used this from our refrigerator. After mixing together the water and the starter, I added the flour, and it calls for 567 grams of flour. I used the all-purpose flour from Costco, which I've heard is actually a really good bread flour brand. Then you add 20 grams of kosher salt. I used the Diamond brand of kosher salt. Then you just mix it all together. I started by using my dough hook, and then I went to using my hands, making sure all the ingredients were combined. And then you coat the bowl with oil, and then I swirl it around just to coat the bowl, and then put the dough back into the bowl. Here's where I realized probably a little too much oil. Then I just put a towel over it and I left it on the counter for 24 hours. I did wet the towel a little bit because I realized it was starting to get this kind of hardened crust on the top a little bit. And I noticed the loaf didn't really rise. So here's where I started having doubts that this would actually work. I poured the dough onto a not so lightly floured surface and just started shaping into a loaf. This method doesn't call for any of those folds and stretches or any kind of fridge ferment. It's just the 24 hours. It really depends on how hydrated your starter is. And he's got a bunch of tips for how to adjust your starter or get your starter to be at 100% hydration for this method to work. Then I put the loaf into a Dutch oven with parchment paper and I kind of zipped up the bottom of it, and then you let it rise for about 90 minutes. After you let it rise for the 90 minutes, you do score the top of the loaf. He says not to preheat your oven. I accidentally preheated my oven. I didn't follow directions. And so I cooked it 425 with the lid on for about 20 minutes, and then I took the lid off and cooked it about another 20 minutes. You can see it's really kind of crunchy, flexible. I was really happy at this point, thinking, yay, it had worked. It's not the most beautiful loaf I've ever made, but it looks pretty darn good. I was thinking the bottom was going to be too hard because of the color, but it was actually pretty easy to cut through. I think I need to cook this another 5 minutes. I usually take the temperature to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a little bit gummy inside, and yes, this is more of a dense loaf, but it's so delicious. It's great sandwich bread, and this was such a simple, easy method to do. So if you're interested in this super easy, he calls it lazy way, check out Ben Starr on YouTube.